Annihulus sounds like a bad metalcore band that plays Denny's on the weekends. It's also a Marvel Snap card. People are pretty excited about it. But is he worth the excitement? Let's go over his mechanics, the good, the bad, potential deck list, and then pass final judgment and see whether or not Annihulus is worth it in this installment of
Is it worth it?
What's up, nerds? Let's jump right into some interactions and mechanics. Actually, no, probably should read the card first. Annihulus is a 5 energy 7 power card that reads, on reveal, your cards with 0 or less power switch sides. Destroy those that can't. As far as interactions and mechanics go, these are the ones I could come up with. There aren't really a lot. I feel like this card's pretty straightforward and his use case is really straightforward. But yeah, let's start off with he is not Destroyer. I don't know why, but I'm still seeing people assume that he's going to destroy all of your cards that can't switch sides. Nah. He's just going to ship over anything that is 0 or less power to the opponent and destroy them if they can't switch sides. So everything you have that is over 0 power is not going to be affected by Annihulus whatsoever. The second thing I could come up with is locations matter. Now here I'm referring to places like Necrotia, the negative zone, sewer system I believe it's called. Those locations that have or afflict negative power onto your cards will then make your cards switch sides if they are 0 or less power when you play Annihulus. So with those locations in play, Annihulus could be sort of taken advantage of with that sort of stuff. Cards that usually wouldn't switch sides, you can then play your deck accordingly and then switch over some cards that usually wouldn't be able to switch over. And the last thing I could come up with is mirror matches. If there are 2 Annihuluses played on turn 5, whatever turn really, but if 2 Annihuluses are played, the one that reveals second is going to be the one that is worth a damn, basically. The first player plays their Annihulus, it flips over, those cards switch sides, destroy those that can't, and then the second Annihulus flips over, and then it's going to do the same thing. So whoever reveals second is going to basically win that trade. Now keep this in mind, because with the potential deck list we're going over later, it's sort of something that I bring up for one of the cards that I suggest you play when Annihulus comes out. But let's move on to the good aspects of Annihulus. The good, he's an archetype staple. He is the MODOK of junk decks. Remember when MODOK released and it just took discard decks to a whole nother level? The whole Dracula, APOC, Morbius sort of deck? Now, you can't imagine it without MODOK. Well, Annihulus is that for the junk archetype. It's probably one of the main reasons to pick up this card. If you want to play junk at all from here on out, in Marvel Snap's future, you're gonna need Annihulus. Alright, the second good thing, his base power is actually quite decent for the effect he has. Now his effect can be absolutely backbreaking. It will just crush certain games. Say you play out a debris and a hood, and then you ship over 3 things that clog up the opponent's side of the board. Not only is that going to clear up space on your side, it's going to absolutely wreck the opponent's turn 6 plays. So him being at 7 power is actually quite decent. I've seen a couple of people be like, oh, his stats are kind of weak for a 5-drop. But I mean, Legion is a 7 power card and his effect is strong. It's still a great card. That's where I think Annihulus, he used to be an 8 power card. They dropped it to a 7 and they would only do that if they tested out Annihulus at an 8 drop and they were like, yeah, this is a little too good. So to me, 7 power is really good for the effect you're getting. Alright, the last good aspect of Annihulus is Luke Cage is not needed. Now what I mean by this is generally when you consider playing Hazmat in any deck, you kinda are forced to put in Luke Cage now. Well, with Annihulus, you can just throw out a Hazmat on any turn of the game, as long as you have Annihulus in your hand, and then you can play your Annihulus and ship over everything that got hit with your own Hazmat. So now we can do like Hazmat combo decks, any sort of junk decks, whatever sort of Hazmat meme you want to use. You don't really need Luke Cage on the field to make your Hazmat worth playing. But what about the bad parts of Annihulus? There's not much, but here you can see the 2. The first negative of Annihulus is he is super niche. He's as niche as, like I said earlier, MODOK. That's kind of how I'm thinking about this card. Now, where do you see MODOK being used? Hela and the APOC Dracula list. I think Annihulus is the same sort of deal, maybe even more niche. I can't imagine a deck that isn't the Junk Archetype where you would want to play Annihilus. The only way that's going to happen, in my opinion, is if the meta just gets so inbred and people just start putting Annihilus in their deck solely so they don't have stuff come to their side of the board. Now, if that's the case, the meta is screwed up. But in general, it's Annihilus is only going to have one home. All right, the second negative of Annihilus is this cube rate. To me, this feels like someone playing Jane Foster after they played Mr. Negative and flipped all their cards. If you see that play, if someone goes negative into Jane Foster, you get the hell out of there. I think Annihilus is sort of the same deal. If the opponent plays Hood into Black Widow into Debris, and then they snap on you, just leave for one cube. Yeah, so Annihilus is gonna have like a good win rate because his effect is so strong in the Junk Archetype, but I think his cube rate is actually gonna be pretty chish. So with Annihilus, you're probably gonna have to snap early in those games, otherwise you're only gonna be winning 1 or 2 cubes at the most with this card. Now that's not really the biggest negative. We're like, oh, a negative of a card is that he's gonna win you the game. Sure, but yeah, when you're thinking about climbing the ranks and stuff like that, it was sort of a downfall of Galactus back in the day. If a Galactus got played and you didn't snap appropriately, you'd win 1 cube, and it's like, great, you just invested that time for 1 friggin' cube. Okay, go ahead and take my cube, buddy, and then you'd move on to the next game. All right, and now we are at the potential deck list. What do you know? It's a junk deck. Yeah. Now, before I go on explaining this deck, like I really even need to, but before I go on any further, I want to point out that this deck is made specifically for the first 48 hours of Annihilus being released. There's going to be a ton of mirror matches, and people are going to get annoyed, so it's probably best to tech in some stuff that gives you an edge there. Oh, another thing I want to point out too, though, is there are a lot of different ways to build junk lists. You could do stuff with like, you could do Mojo and Nebula and Polaris. You could include Dr. Octopus, Spider-Woman, Hazmat. It's actually, there's going to be a lot of similar Annihilus decks that are like 1 or 2 cards off, which is actually kind of cool. The cool thing about the Junk Archetype. It's going to vary a bunch from each individual player's deck. But anyways, okay, so this deck, we have Ghost here because Ghost ensures your Annihilus will reveal second. And we already covered this before. If you're playing an Annihilus matchup, the Annihilus that reveals last is the one that matters. So in my opinion, Ghost is going to be the best it's ever been on the 2 days after Annihilus's release. Everything else here is pretty straightforward. I guess we'll go over the deck a little bit. Titania is great here as a turn 6 play because the board is going to be clogged for your opponent. So Titania does not really have a downside here. Also, Titania with Green Goblin is very cute on turn 4. Black Widow is just a 2-cost goblin, really, in my opinion. They get a -1 and fills up a space on their board. We have Luke Cage here to pair with the Man-Thing. I could see not doing Man-Thing or Luke Cage and doing like Mojo and Polaris or something like that. And then the rest of the deck is stuff to clog your opponent, Annihilus to ship it over, and we have America Chavez here to ensure that we draw our Annihilus as much as possible, because if you're doing Hood, Black Widow, Green Goblin, Debris, and the Sentry, you sure as hell want your Annihilus in a timely fashion to get rid of all that crap. Finally, Sentry is going to be a playable card in Marvel Snap. I know people have tried him a bunch with like Valkyrie or Cosmo and stuff like that. Still not that great over there, but now Sentry's going to be a good card. Yay. On to the Spotlight Caches. The other cards featured in the Spotlight Cache are Daken and X23. So, recommendation on opening Spotlight Caches. If you want Annihilus only, and you're cool with knowing that he's only ever going to go in one deck, yeah, sure, it's better than 6k tokens. And like I said earlier, he's going to be an absolute staple for any junk list from here on out, so it's worth it in that regard. Now, if you're on the fence of Annihilus, the only way I could recommend opening Spotlight Caches is if you also don't have X23. Daken is really, it's whatever. Daken's not that great of a card. You can do some memey stuff with them, but there isn't any deck in the game where it's like, oh, you need Daken. So, just sort of ignore that he is in these Spotlight Caches. But yeah, if you play Destroy every now and then, you don't have X23, and you're on the fence about Annihilus, then I would go for it just for the sheer fact that you might get a good card in X23. Now, if you don't want X23 and you're on the fence about Annihilus, then no, I would not open spotlight caches for it. Because if you're unsure whether or not you want to even use Annihulus, it's best to play it safe. That's a lot of investment with spotlight caches to play a card you're not sure about. Now, as far as collector's tokens go, 6k is a lot. I can only recommend you spend 6k tokens on Annihulus if you already have Dakin and X23 and you are 100% positive that you are going to play Annihulus. If you're unsure at all whether or not Annihulus is a good card, don't spend 6k tokens on him. A card that's good in one deck for 6k tokens is absurd. Wait a week or so and see if he ends up being as great as he seems he's going to be. Remember to leave a like and subscribe. It's a little work for you, but for me, it means a whole lot. Thank you so much to the members of my channel. You the real G's. And if you're interested in joining their exalted ranks, it's $1.99 a month. A bunch of cool emojis to use on the live streams, members only posts, priority reply to comments. I put as much perks in there as I could. So check that out if you want to support me at all. That's it though. Later on, nerds.